If we take away perspective, what do you think would be the next thing in this drawing that would cause most people most problems? The title of this video is a bit of a giveaway, but I think it would be these wrought iron balcony rails, which are so much a part of the architecture of beautiful buildings such as these houseman apartments in Paris, that they're everywhere, and yet they present unique challenges in drawing. They're a bit like when we have trees appearing next to our buildings. They're such a different subject that there can be a large skill difference between how well we can draw trees and how well we can draw the buildings. And I think it's the same with these wrought iron balcony rails. I've had a lot of practice drawing them now, and I've developed a way of looking at them and thinking about them, analysing them, and actually putting pen on paper. And I think I've got a good compromise of something that looks about right, so it doesn't draw unnecessary attention, and something that doesn't take more time than the rest of the drawing put together to do. So let me share and demonstrate how I do my wrought iron balcony rails. Let's go. The first thing to notice is how beautiful they are. If we truly appreciate the art of designing and making them, then it will be easier to spend a little more time thinking about how to draw them. Some balconies, such as this one, are worthy of being drawn all on their own without any architecture. But there are many designs which, while complicated enough, are much more straightforward. Many of them have much more of a vertical emphasis and of a repeated motif or of several repeated motifs. The wrought iron usually is of a different pattern on different floors. And I like to suggest a different pattern on the different floors, and so create a sense of the difference that is in real life. Another thing to notice with balcony wrought iron railings is that they are often along long facades, very affected by perspective and therefore foreshortening. So the way in which we might draw a pattern that's closest to us can be very different to what we have to draw at the other end of the building. So all these things complicate the balconies. So how do we draw them? When I see a wrought iron railing, the first thing I try and do is work out how the pattern works. Find the symmetry. Find the repeat. So if I look at this one down here, in fact it's a simple pattern in that it's the same motif just repeated. There are these long lozenge shapes with circles between them, and the lozenge shapes have a crisscross effect on them, and then there are some decorations above and below these that run along the rail. It's important to capture the feel, and the feel of this is all these vertical lozenges, if you like, and circular decoration between. We have these two perspective lines top and bottom with the rails, and that this row of circles needs to sit between them. The angle needs to follow the perspective lines that the top and bottom rails follow. Let's draw it. The first thing I will do is I will try and put some guidelines in. I'm going to use to position these lozenge shapes. Then I also want to get in some guides for my circles. Looking to see just how wide these are, and they pretty much are equally spaced. I do need to allow for foreshortening, and then every second one I'd be joining the top of the lozenge and the bottom, and there's a bit of a crisscross shape, but again it's the effect we're going for. One important thing, I'm doing each element all the way along. I'm not finishing a little section and then doing the next little section. The most important thing is that the effect is that it all looks the same. And the best way to make it look the same is to do all the elements at the same time. And that would do for me. If we were doing the one higher up, in some ways this looks simpler, but it's actually a fiddlier pattern. And so I really want to just be suggesting things here. But basically there's two sections. There's this section, and then it's repeated. So the first thing I'm going to do is to define those sections. Again, I need to be careful with perspective lines, but for every second one of these, I want a circle in effect at the bottom. It's not actually a circle, but it's close enough. And this is where drawing a shape that can be most easily drawn accurately is the better option. Now, in the in-between ones, again, the most important thing is that however we do our pattern, it's the same in each section and it follows the perspective line. It matters far less what the actual pattern is. Again, you can see how by doing the one element right the way along lets me get a much more accurate repetition of that shape. And I'd be leaving it like this. As you can see, I've not gone to draw a really exact, accurate balcony, but what I've wanted to do is to capture a sense of what the repeated pattern is and the fact that these two rails are really very different in their pattern, even though it's both a fairly vertical repeated pattern. So what about a more complicated pattern then? Oops, sorry, didn't have the video camera turned on. So I've laid out the top and the bottom rails, and I've observed that there's a repeating of the pattern, there's a square pattern and there's a rectangular pattern, which are very similar, but that two end squares have got a decorative framing on the outside edge, and this square in the center has that same framing on each side. And there is a horizontal axis and the curly pattern flips on each side. So I want to try and capture that horizontal line because that will help keep the perspective looking nice and sharp. Now, there's a lot of detail here. I'm just trying to catch the essence of it. So the important thing is that this looks symmetrical, whatever we end up drawing. There's the first square motif done. Now I have the rectangular one. Usually by the time you've finished, you've worked out the best way to draw it. So now I'm trying to create the same effect that I've already drawn, centering things in our space. And so on. A couple of little tips is sometimes we can see a motif easier in one part of the building that's not the actual part that we're drawing. So for instance, this section is really easier to read than this section just because of what's behind it and the way the light falls and the shadow falls. This is a more accurately drawn section than this one, and it's partly because as I was looking at this easier to see section, I realized that these little curly Q ends line up on the vertical, as do these line up on the vertical. So I was able to line them up on the vertical in a way I didn't realize I needed to do over here. And the important thing is that we're trying to create the effect of this pattern, not the exactness of it. It's just the same as when we draw a tree and we capture the effect of the leaves. We're not drawing all the leaves. And with the rest of the architectural detailing around it, this is absolutely, certainly for my drawing, all the detail we will need to show that this is a beautiful wrought iron balcony rail. Sometimes rails fit into awkward shapes, and we can see the beautiful wrought iron insets in the stair banisters. So if we were drawing this staircase, how would we capture this? But I'd be looking at creating this axis first, seeing that there's an inset along the top. It's important to recognize what we're seeing through the pattern and what's the pattern. So this line here is actually this line on the far side of the staircase. And there's one there that goes into there. There's one there that comes from here. And there's one there. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines crossing it. On this side, the pattern actually is not symmetrical. So I've got 1, 2, 3 again. And then it's always worth a look at the end. Can I correct something just slightly to make the symmetry look a bit better? But remember, we're going for the overall effect. And if this was set into a larger drawing, certainly for my drawing style, that would be more than adequate to convey the sense of the pattern. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Balcony balustrades are one of those things that can be really frustrating because it can feel that they're not so important to the architecture, but they can take up so much time and seem so much harder than the other details that we have to draw. But if we don't get them right, if we don't draw them in a similar style to a similar degree as the rest of our architectural subject, they'll stand out awkwardly, whether we draw them badly, whether we underdraw them, or whether we overdraw them. We want them to sit in so that they're no more obvious on our drawing than they are on the building itself. I hope my thinking and my process could be helpful for you when you come to draw wrought iron balconies. But I think the comparison that I mentioned in the video with trees is a really helpful one. We're not trying to draw the exact detail of the railings. We're trying to capture the effect, the feel. If we draw them thoughtfully, we will get better at it. Why don't you practice some? Have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.